In this tutorial, I will show you two ways in which you can export from Gaea into Unreal Engine. The first of that is by just using the Gaea plugin, and the second is the more manual approach of exporting and then importing height maps or diffuse maps, etc. into Unreal Engine. So to start with, I've got a very simple setup created. I've just got a mountain range, and then I've got a couple of nodes for texturing, which are connected via a portal. Obviously, as this is about exporting, I'm not going to go too much into actually building a landscape. So to start with, make sure you've got the Unreal Engine plugin installed. So to do that, it's fairly straightforward. Just go up to Tools, then Install Plugins, and then Gaea to Unreal, and select that option. So once you've downloaded it, simply unzip it, go into the unzip folder, and it's only supporting 5.3 to 5.5 at the moment. I'm sure they'll support 5.6 and so forth as new versions are released, or hopefully they will. Right click on the version you want. In this case, I'll do 5.5, and then just again, extract or unzip, and then copy paste or just drag into the plugins folder for Unreal Engine. So you'll find that in your program files. It'll be in your local disk unless you've installed it somewhere else, but most of the time it'll be in local disk, program files, Epic Games. Then go to the version that you're going to use, in which case, in this case, the maximum is 5.5, so version 5.5, go into that, and then Engine, and then Plugins, and then the copy or paste or drag. Now, I've already got it installed. I've already got it there, so I won't do it again. But once you've got that in your plugins folder, it should appear in Unreal Engine. Before we go into Unreal Engine, let's just export out this height map. So in the graph, just right click and search for Unreal. And there's a node for Unreal Engine. Grab that. Now from the mountain range height map, or from whatever node you want to export your height map out from, just drag off, plug it into the input or the in socket. So when you plug in your height map node into the Unreal Engine node, it exaggerates the height, but don't worry about that, because when you export this out, you will be back to the height that you were expecting, which will be in your height map node that you plugged into the Unreal Engine node. Now I'm just going to get the color base, or the color map I should say, drag out from there, and I'm actually just going to drop it into the middle of the Unreal Engine node. And it asks add a new port, or one of the options is add a new port. So just click on add a new port, and then in the Unreal Engine node, it actually adds the additional map. So the first map it knows is height, and the second map it knows is color. It's fairly decent from what I have found of detecting the specific map type of map that you're looking for. You can always change it if you need to, but this is exactly what I want: height and then color. You've got some different format options. PNG is the most compatible. There is also an option for automatic size, or if I untick it, I can actually select one of the supported resolutions in Unreal Engine. So this is the actual resolution of your landscape height map texture file. But for this, I'll just click automatic size, and it's telling me the output size will be 4033, which equates to, it's just over 4 kilometers. It's 4.03 kilometers. So it's basically a 4 kilometer size, or it's very close to also a 4K texture size resolution. And finally, before we export, if I just click in the build settings here, the resolution we can actually ignore. But if we look at terrain size, then we've got width 5,000 and height 1,000. I can make this a little bit taller to 2,000. I'll keep the width on the default size, which is 5,000 meters. So this terrain is basically 5,000 by 5,000, which is 5 kilometers by 5 kilometers. So before we go to build, if you just select on the build option, it's just got your build destination. So then you can change the file where it saves to. I've just got a folder just for this, just called Unreal Engine, but you obviously save it wherever is best for you. And then close it. And now let's just go to build and start the build. And then depending on the complexity of your graph, it'll either take a fairly short time or just a longer time. This is quite a simple graph, so it's going to be done fairly quickly. So the export has completed. If I just click on the height map here and just look in the dimensions details, it's 4033, so 4033 by 4033, which is one of the Unreal Engine standard landscape resolution sizes. So I've opened up Unreal Engine and I've created a new level, which is just obviously blank at the moment. So before we do anything else, let's just activate the plugins. So go to Edit and Plugins and then search for Gaea. And you should have a Gaea plugin option come up. Just tick this. Now, when you tick this, you'll have to restart. I've already done this, of course, so I won't do this, but restart the project. And when the project restarts, it's possible you may not be able to see anything. Now, if you just go up and to the right of platforms, hover over that area there, you'll actually see a pop-up comes up that says Opens Gaea Landscape Importer. Now, it should have a little Gaea icon there, but for some reason it's not showing. I suppose it's possible it could just be bug in my project, but if you can't see anything, just go over and hover up just to the right of platforms and you should have the plugin there. Before I bring the map in, I'm just going to add an environment, which is very quick. So if you haven't got an environment already, just go to Window and go to Environment Light Mixer. And then we can just click on all the buttons there as key components for our environment. I'm just going to close down that panel. And that looks great. It's just compiling some shaders for the clouds. And now it's added the clouds. So we've done that. Now let's go back and click on the landscape importer. Now there are a bunch of default options here. We can leave them all as they are. Just click on import heightmap and then just go to wherever you've saved the heightmap. So when you found your heightmap, select it and then click on open. And it's not meant to do that. Let me try that again. So click on import heightmap, open. This time the pop-up box has stayed open. I guess that was a minor bug there, but let's now click on create landscape and try again. And there you go. I'm just going to move the viewport. So I'm actually above the landscape, zoom out a bit, and that is looking great. So if I just jump back into Gaea for a moment, if I just click on the actual mountain range heightmap node, you can see that was the height and scale I was looking at. If I just jump back to Unreal Engine, then that actually matches what I'm looking for. If I just make sure that this landscape is selected, I can see in its details panel, it's got a resolution of 4033 by 4033, and that matches the size of our texture. Also, what's happened is the scale has been slightly enlarged, it's been slightly increased on the X and the Y, but the Z has been slightly decreased. This is what the Gaea plugin did. It just adjusted the size so it equals 5 kilometers. We can actually check this. So if I go into perspective, click on top, I can also go into wireframe mode just for this. And then near the top, as close as I can get, if I just hold the middle mouse button, I can just drag down and just about at the bottom, you can see it's 500,000. So that size equates to 500,000 centimeters, which works out as 5 kilometers, which matches the size of a map from Gaea. Now, because this is a landscape height map, and because it's been scaled up on the X and the Y, it hasn't skewed or stretched the scale of the map, and we don't get any pixelation like you can get in a color or diffuse map or another similar mask. This is all great, but let's just say we want to bring in a landscape height map and we want to actually scale it ourselves. So let's do it the manual way and bring it up to 5 kilometers. So I'm back in Gaea. This time I'm actually going to delete the Unreal Engine export node. I'm going to right click on the mountain range and then I'm going to mark for export. I can do the sat map as well. It doesn't matter too much for this because I'm just looking at the landscape sizes, but I can mark that for export also. Make sure they're PNG, and PNG 16 or 16-bit is a good quality to go with. Now in the actual build settings, this is when the actual resolution will matter because we're not using the Unreal Engine export node anymore. And I'll just keep this to 4K in this case, so it's 4096. And in the build, I'm just going to select on that, and I'm not going to do overwrite, I'm going to do increment, so I won't accidentally overwrite any of the files that are there already. And now I'm just going to go to build and start the build. Now the build is finished, we'll just have a quick look. I've got the new export here, and you can see this is the industry standard 4K, 4096 by 4096, and I've got the color map as well, which I won't actually use for this, but it's there as well, also 4K. Let's go back into Unreal Engine. Now we can have more than one landscape in Unreal Engine, so just for now, I'm just going to back to perspective. I'm going to go to top left-hand side, click on landscape mode, manage, new. I'm going to import from file. Heightmap file, I'm just going to select those little button there with those 3 dots, and I'm going to select, to make sure this time I select the 4K map, which is this one here without the H. And I'm just going to click on open. So I'm just going to jump into top view mode now and zoom out a bit. And then I'm just going to drag this landscape, this new landscape, to the side. Now, as you can see, the height map resolution is 4000 or 4K, 4096. And if we go down to the overall resolution, that's also matching it at 4096. However, it's not the same size as the initial landscape that we brought in. That's because this landscape on the left is 5 kilometers, and this has come into the size of the resolution, which is almost just about 4K. It's actually 4.09 or maybe 4.1 kilometers in size, this new landscape. How it works out is 1 pixel equals 1 meter. So this new landscape here has a width and a depth of 4096. So it's basically almost 4 kilometers squared. However, we want this 5 kilometers. Now, you can't just go into overall resolution and let's just say a key in 5000. Even if you key in 5000, it actually automatically adjusts the number. So an overall resolution of 5000, you can't actually input. It's just so it matches components and so forth. For now, we don't need to worry about that point. But as you can see, this is now pretty much matching the size of 5 kilometers. The problem is the resolution of the height map is 4096, so it's not going to match the size of the landscape. If I just click on import, and don't actually do this, you can watch this part, but don't follow this. If I click import, we actually get stretching on the edges. So I'll just import it. Now, if I just go back to perspective for a moment, so I'm going to select the first landscape in the world outliner. Now, I know that this first landscape, its position is about 17,000 in height. So in this new landscape, I'm just going to key in its transform 17,000 just to bring it up, press enter. Again, it might take a few moments to actually reposition the landscape because it's such a huge mesh. Now, as you can see, we've got this stretching on the edges here. That's just because the landscape was a larger resolution than the actual height map. Hence, the height map is in the middle and then the edges are just stretched. Now, you can just sculpt this. So I could go to smooth and start smoothing these edges out. That's fine. You can do that. Maybe add some noise, increase the brush size. Actually, it's already at the maximum size and so forth. And then you can just sculpt all the way around. It's a little bit laborious having to do that, but it is an option. But let's just say we want to bring in our height map without stretching the edges. This is why we have to increase the scale of the landscape. So I'm just going to delete this. And now I'm going to go back to manage and add a new landscape. So if you ever bring in a landscape height map and you find you've got stretching on the edges, that's because the resolution of the height map is not matching the resolution of the actual landscape mesh or the procedural mesh that's generated. So I've gone back to new now. I've gone back into manage and new, and all the settings as they were before. I've got 4K height map and it's matched the overall resolution. If I change the quads, for example, it gets too big. So if I go to 127 quads, then it's just much bigger than 5 kilometers. In fact, let me change back to top view. It gives us a clearer view, like so. So I'm just going to drop it back down to 63 by 63. When you do that, it does change the overall resolution back to one of its default settings, which is 4033. So let me just click in that and put 4096 by 4096. So now to actually change this to 5 kilometers is actually fairly straightforward. So I know that a value of 5,000 will be 5,000 meters or 5 kilometers. I need to divide that value by the overall resolution and then times it by 100. So we can do this in the actual scale fields. So my kilometer size that I want is 5 kilometers. So I put 5,000 for 5,000 meters. I divide it by the resolution. So just do the forward slash, which is for divide. It is divide. So the resolution for this is 4096. So I can press enter now, and it gives me 1.2. I just need to multiply that. So if I hold down shift and press 8 to get the multiply symbol, then multiply it by 100. There you go. It's 122, and that is the scale I'm looking for. Just to show that again, if I just click on the landscape, the first landscape that is, so this is the one that Gaea, the Gaea plugin, calculated automatically. It's actually got 123 as opposed to 122. The reason this is 123 is because the resolution for this first height map was 4033. If I just quickly do that, you don't have to do this. You can watch this part. So it's 5,000 divided by 4033. multiplied, this time I'll just go straight to multiplied by 100, and it equals 123.97, which matches this landscape that Gaea brought him, which is 123.97. However, because the landscape that we're bringing in is slightly bigger, the resolution is slightly bigger, let's just go back to the other sum, which is 5,000 divided by 4,096 times by 100, and it's just a slightly lower scaling up. But that gives us 5 kilometers. So basically, to figure out the size of your landscape, whether that's 2 kilometers or 5 kilometers, basically figure out what the size in kilometers is in meters. So 2 kilometers will be 2,000. Then divide 2,000 by the resolution of the height map and times it by 100, and that will give you a 2 kilometer size height map. I'll also put this calculation into the description of the video. So now I've done my manual calculation. I just click on import. Now it's imported it, I go back to perspective. I'm just going to bring up the size of this new landscape. So I'm just going to select it in the world outliner, and I know the location is 17,000 on the Z value or the Z value. So I'll just key that in. It can take a while to load. And I'm just going to change the editing mode back to selection mode. And there you go. We've got a 5 kilometer landscape from a 4K height map. To finish off, just a couple of points. The first one is in regards to the actual height of the landscape. So with the actual size, the X and the Y value, we actually work into a resolution. But when it comes to the height, there's not a Z value. It's just, it's 4,096 by 4,096. So using the same calculation, dividing the meters by the resolution and times in 100 doesn't actually give us the same result. To be honest, in Gaea, I put a height value of 2,500 meters, which is 2.5 kilometers, which is actually really tall and a lot taller than something I'd probably ever use. Although saying that, Everest is about 8,000 meters. So if you're going by a real world scale, then you would, for Everest, you'd need to put in 8,000 meters, which you'd also need a really big landscape. So you'd probably have to use well partition to actually fit that onto your landscape. But for this, there's 2 ways I would do this. One, I'd literally just eyeball it. So in height, I might put a value of like 500 in the Z scale field. And so I've just keyed in 500 there. It's going to take a moment to increase. I'm just going to, or load, I'm just going to drag it up. That looks great. That looks fine. If you're looking for something a little bit more precise than just eyeballing, another way I would do this is I could go into perspective and then left. And then as before, just pop my mouse over the high point and then just drag down, and I can see it's 44,000 or around that, 43,000. So that's 43,000 centimeters or about 430, 440 meters, something around that. You could do that. Or the second way, very simply, is I actually go into Blender and I create a reference shape. So this is just a cube. I'm just going to press 1 on my keypad just to go to side view and just drag it up, just so the bottom of the cube is right with the world origin, or is next to the world origin. Then just go to object and set origin, and then origin to 3D cursor, just so the origin of this shape is at the bottom. And then with the shape selected or the cube selected, in its dimensions, put in, let's say 500 meters, then Control A and scale. So all the scales are matching and there's no risk of skewing or stretching or anything. And now I know I've got a cuboid shape of 500 meters. Just gonna export it. So with that selected, file, export, FBX is fine. Name it 500 meters, selected objects, and then mesh, and then export out to whatever is best for you to export that out. Back in Unreal Engine. I've just exported that into my download folder. This is just a quick test. I'm just going to drag that in. All the defaults I'll keep as they are, and I'll just click import. And now I know I've got a static mesh that's 500 meters tall. If I just open that up very quickly, I can see in its size, approximate size, 200 by 50,000. So 50,000 divided by 100 is 500. And that's what I put in Blender, 500 meters. So I know that is correct. Let's just drag this in. Perhaps I could have made it a bit wider. It's a bit easier to see. But now I've got this reference point. I'm just going to hide the fog for a moment. Just hide that fog. Perhaps let's just go back into a side view. Zoom in a bit. Drag this down to the bottom of the landscape. There you go. Back into perspective. Okay. and I've got a manual reference there of 500 meters. So I could then start playing around with this value here. If I wanted this peak to match this, you know, I could just go up to 700 or 800, bit of trial and error, but eventually I would get something matching this size. So that's great. So the second thing is just in regards to actually working out the scale of the landscape and in regards to stretching or skewing and so forth. If I just go back to landscape, if I click on new, let's just say I actually wanted an 8K landscape. So I'd go into scale and I would do 8,000 divided by 4,096. And let's just say I had a heightmap texture file which had a resolution of 4096 by 4096, and then I just times this by 100 like so. In fact, let me go into the top view and zoom out. So this is 8K, and now it's still got the same heightmap before as selected as before, so I'm just going to import this. Now what's going to happen is we're still going to have the heightmap covering the area. There's not going to be any stretching or anything at the edges. But the actual details, so if I go back into perspective, but the actual details are getting enlarged across the landscape. So all of the details are getting bigger. So if I just zoom in here, we've got this kind of like gully here. This gully is actually going to be bigger. I'll just let that save. So, okay, so I've got this gully here. This gully is actually going to be bigger. And then if I go back over here, then this, I think that's the same gully, than this gully here. So it is affecting the layout of my heightmap. Now, let me just go back into selection, select this. Let me just bring up the value to, like, let's say 500. Now, when it comes to actually playing the game, to be honest, it might not make that much difference. Like, your players aren't really going to know that. You're going to be the only one that knows that. It's not skewed or stretched. It's just the overall size has been increased, but everything's got bigger. All the details have got bigger. So, you know, say again, this little peak here, or this big peak here, is going to be bigger than this peak here. It's all the same details, just enlarged on a larger area. So it's just something to consider. If you're going to do an 8-kilometer landscape, it's probably a good idea to use an 8-kilometer or 8K, I should say, height map. Now that is going to be a bit more demanding, or perhaps a lot more demanding on your system. So you do have to keep an eye on your optimization and, you know, your frame rate and see how it affects it, especially if you're, you know, having a lot of foliage across the landscape as well. So it's just, that's just to watch out. There's no like right or wrong to this, but if you want to keep your details, then in your landscape height map, then use a 4K height map with a 4-kilometer or a 5-kilometer landscape. If you're going to 8K, then just use an 8K resolution height map. So I should say 8-kilometer size landscape, use an 8K resolution. So just to finish off now, in landscape, if you go to manage and new, and let's say you've set your landscape up to 8K, you can increase the quads up to, let's say, the maximum 255. The quads are just these, it's just how the landscape is broken down. It's just these squares. Basically, you can add more squares in to your landscape mesh, which does go bigger than 8K. Let's go to top. That's actually gone like twice as big. So I think off the top of my head, that's 16 kilometers, sorry. So that would be a size of 16 kilometers. However, to be honest, like at this size, when you go above something like 8K, 8 kilometers, you're probably better off starting to use well partition, because it's better for optimization, and you can optimize it and you can cull your landscape and objects on it and so forth. And well partition gives you more options in that area. And that pretty much covers it. So if you've got any questions or any thoughts, please do leave them in the comment section. Thanks.